أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المكرمين أما بعد قال الله جل وعلا في كتابه المجيد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الذين يستمعون القول فيتبعون أحسنه أولئك الذين هداهم الله وأولئك هم أولو الألباب صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Allah Azza wa Jal describes a quality in believing people. The quality in believing people that is of the most important qualities of a believing person, and not just believing people, of the greatest of believers, the Anbiya, the prophets, the Awsiya, the Imams after prophets, the Salihin, the righteous people. They all have a quality that is free, available to all human beings, and they practice it 100% of the time perfectly. And in fact, it's a quality that if they did not have it, Allah Azza wa Jal will not send them prophethood. It's a quality that Allah Azza wa Jal describes for believers. Inshallah, we can claim to have the status of belief. He says, الَّذِينَ يَسْتَمِعُونَ الْقَوْلَ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ أَحْسَنَ. That there are people that pay attention, they do istima', they seek to listen the best of speech, and they do what that speech says. But then he continues and he says, أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ هَدَاهُمُ اللَّهُ. If you want to know if a person is guided, if you want to know if you yourself are guided, it's commensurate with how actively you listen and you apply. And then he goes further than this. Not only is this person guided, he says, وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمْ أُولُو الْأَلْبَابِ. Allah, ulul albab. They are people of reflection. Ulul albab are one of the greatest human beings. In fact, the people of depth that when you have a conversation with them, they take you to different levels, they take you to different places. They're ulul albab. They are people that understand fully where they are and where they're going. And they reflect a lot. Allah Azza wa Jal is saying it comes with one quality for you to have huda, to be of ulul albab, for you to be of the people that he says follow the best of things. You have to start with listening. You have to listen. You've come today to listen to something. The Quran is delivered through a mouth into the ears, from a piece of flesh into a vibrating bone, as Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam he says. But you find that if you go to our fuqaha, when they are asked the question, I go to the shopping center, Maulana, is it haram when I hear all this music? And the sheikh will say, there's a difference between as-sama' and al-istima'. He'll say, if it's only sama'i, as in you're walking past and you're not focusing, it's okay. Nothing haram in this. But when you do istima', it's in the sigha of istif'al, seeking to do. When you do istighfar, you are seeking ghufran from Allah. Istighfar, istif'al, you have istima', you're seeking to listen, which means that you're actively listening to a thing. Now, what we're going to discuss inshallah today, one is the catastrophe of the lack of active listening in today's day and age. This is number one. Two, we're going to talk about the ahadith around this. Allah Azza wa Jalla is mentioning the verse in the Quran al-Kareem, and to my counting, I found 35 verses just referring to listening, and 3 verses in the Quran al-Kareem referring to active listening. So there are many verses, and it's spoken about Allah. لو كنا نسمع أو نعقل ما كنا في أصحاب السعير. If we were to listen, if we did not listen and use our intellect, we would not have been of the patrons of Jahannam. These are the words of people that enter hell, and Allah Azza wa Jal presents that future to us. So we can hear that type of conversation. لو كنا نسمع. If only we listened as a group, we wouldn't be where we are. For in that respect, صلى على محمد وآل محمد. The lack of listening affects us in many ways. Number one, it affects our ability to learn. How often you've gone to a lecture, or you've gone to your studies at university, or you've learned a trade and you're on site, and a superior or an authority on a topic or an industry is speaking, and you miss what they say. Now, there's a person next to you who didn't miss what they say. So when they've come back to ask you questions, the person that was impressive was the person who paid attention. You find that your career is deeply affected by a lack of listening. The next one, outside of your career, employment, learning, the catastrophic one, the one that affects 50% of people, that is marriage, relationships. Before we get into marriage, let's talk about just our relationships. How often we're speaking to each other and we're scrolling. Now, this has become accepted in society. We have to the extent where people sit and they scroll together. That's become socializing, subhanAllah. We scroll together. You know, homies that roll together, scroll together, you know? That's the attitude that we have. But really, connection and heartfelt relationships with people, they have no scrolling. They have actually just, they put the phones down. That's why it's a ritual. It's become a culture that you have a big bowl, a fish bowl, and people come over when they visit you and they put their phone in the fish bowl, and they focus on socializing. This is a new culture it's funny because when I was growing up, that wasn't a thing. That was the norm, to not have our devices on us. Allah Azza wa Jal gave us one mouth and two ears for a reason. The same way He elevated the brain and the heart, He's lowered your private parts in your belly. In our takween, the creative energy Allah Azza wa Jal put, and the creative design He put behind things indicates the importance of that thing. Of course, how interesting would the human being be if his digestive tract was in his skull and you heard all the murmurs of his hunger, you know, for example. And if other parts of the body were in other places. Allah Azza wa Jal has given us a particular design. We have two ears and we have one mouth. Some people derive the wisdom, then you should speak half as what you listen to. And I think there is a wisdom in that. And you find that when you listen to a person, you're actively not speaking. What you've actually done is you've decelerated. We are, perhaps in Sydney, I know that when I travel to Queensland or other places, they know I'm from Sydney. How do you know I'm from Sydney? You speak very fast. I go, I didn't know. That's just how we speak in Sydney. I think you speak very slow in Brisbane, you know. But you notice that we're a bit more fast-paced in urban society. Things are very fast-paced. So we're always trying to get a word in, and we say a lot, but we don't speak a lot of substance, unfortunately. So when we're actively listening to other people, it's slowing down the whole situation. And in fact, if there's one thing I noticed, for example, even when I lecture, I find it interesting that sometimes I think I pause for about 10 seconds. But that's just a feeling I'm having because, you know, it can be a bit nerve-wracking. But really, when I play something back just to review, it was only like a blink. Our concept of time in our brain and our mouth and our ears is completely different. We think a lot faster than we act. So when we're speaking, there's a bit of an anxiety that we have trying to get the word in, when in fact, we'd actually get a lot more out of it. And on top of that, we would have that person felt understood. And it's important to say that, like outside of the Anbiya being good listeners, it's part of your religion to be a good listener. If you're religious, you're a good listener. In other words, we all have to practice being good listeners. Why? Outside of the ayah, الَّذِينَ يَسْتَمِعُونَ الْقَوْلِ and نعم الَّذِينَ يَسْتَمِعُونَ الْقَوْلِ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ أَحْسَنَهُ. Outside of that verse, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, he says, عَوِّدْ أُذُنَكَ حُسْنَ الْإِسْتِمَاعِ. Get your ear used to the best in paying attention, in hearing. وَلَا تُصْغِي إِلَى مَا لَا يَزِيدُ فِي صَلَاحِكَ إِسْتِمَاعُ. And don't pay attention to anything that doesn't work in your favor, that if you listen to it, it works against you. Only listen to things that's worth listening to, in other words. So when they say don't listen to music, for example, Sheikhna, but music is fun, it sounds great, it feels good. It triggers parts of the brain, it releases a lot of endorphins. It's a temporary high. But you realize that a lot of the time, what's being delivered through your ears, in the remembrance of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, it's his birthday after all. He says the quickest door to a person's heart is through the ear. In fact, if you want to create relationships, it's through the ears, and if you want to ruin relationships, it's through the ears. Imam Ali alayhi salam, he's saying, don't listen to anything that's not in your salah. Now, what's your salah exactly? What's the Imam referring to? Now look, let's say there's no religious sort of facade or veneer or interior, purely worldly. There's a saying, a person has never listened his way out of a job. If you pay attention to your employer, you're more likely to stay employed, right? But what the Imam is talking about is that you're on a journey. It's a very, very wide hadith, very, very deep. You're on a journey and you're going to die one day. Don't waste any time. That's what he's saying. Don't listen to anything that's going to waste your time. Now, that's hard because there's a lot of temptation. A lot of temptation. In fact, social media providers, they engineer how to get your attention. It's called the attention economy for a reason. The more they can get your attention, the more money they can make off you. So they actually engineer how to keep your attention. Even to the extent where, I don't know if you noticed on your Instagram, if you want to refresh your feed and you drag back and let go, it's common on many social channels. You know that little delay that you get? You don't need that delay. If your 4G's on or 5G's on all the time, it's a live feed. It's in real time. You can just upload as the data comes in, but they actually created that pullback anticipation, then reward. That actual science or that psychology is from poker machines, you see? So there's a lot of competition to get you addicted and to get you listening to things that I mean, like myself personally, with all the things happening in the world, I glued to politics for close to a year. But I felt so spiritually drained because usually I'd spend that time listening to things that were more beneficial. But because of what's happening in a variety of the parts of the world, I got stuck. Al-Muhim, the activity of listening is the activity of Anbiya, of Awsiya, and of Salihin. Inshallah, I want to continue with one more hadith, and we're going to look at what we mean by listening and application. Then we're going to look at a study by the Harvard Business Review and their study of active listening. And it's very interesting because there's a lot of parallels that we have, of course, with Islam and what sciences, other sciences are telling us today. With as-salat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. It's needless to say that listening actively only has benefits. There's never a situation where you actively listen and it works against you. Never. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, man ahsana al-istima' ta'ajjal al-intifa'. Whoever perfects their listening hastens its benefit, right? Now, the purpose of Islam, it was a call. The call to prayer, the adhan, the thing that goes to the udhun, the ear, that was a call to your falah. As in Surah Al-Mu'minun, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. Hayya ala al-falah. Come, seek life in what you will reap from, essentially. Come to what's best. And you find that Allah Azza wa Jal, there's a variety of levels of listening that He spoke with the Anbiya with. So we listen with our ears. The Anbiya have this level where they listen with their entire being. They listen with their heart. And that's why we have many ahadith that mention that although some people can hear with their ears, they have eyes but they don't see with them. They have ears that they don't hear with them. And they have hearts but they have no insight. So there is a level of when you hear, but then there's this level of application. That they hear, they understand the importance of what's being said, and that causes their heart to move towards it. And our lack of application of hearing a thing, what's good. You know, it's interesting. Ask anyone if they're interested in their progress, and they'll say, of course I'm interested in my progress. Ask them, are you interested in listening about your progress? They'll say, I listen to podcasts about it. I listen all the time. How often are you playing a podcast about, your own self-improvement? And you have to rewind 5 seconds ago or 10 seconds, because your train of thought, I can't express to you just how important this is, that our attention span is so low because we don't actually listen. It's like we're living in our own bubbles. You know, for example, we have our own biases, our own ecosystem. For example, me, I would say I'm a Shia, for example. I have this identity that I want to bolster. So I'm always just looking for the talking points from people around me. Anything, any hadith, anything. We're all like this, I think, in our circles. But then, when you look at the conversations of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam and Kumail and other ashab of his, where he says to him, what sprinkles in you overflows in me. Or we have a hadith where he says, one wants to know the truth and all the inner and outer realities of existence. And Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam says 5 lines, and then he asked him at Maghrib. By that time he finished the 5 lines, it was Fajr time. So they prayed the 2 prayers for Maghribain, and they prayed the Maghrib Isha. He sat with the Imam, it's dark. By the time the Imam said only 5 lines, it was Fajr time again. You know, there's a transformative effect when people of depth are speaking to us and we actively listen, and they benefited greatly from this. And of course, you know, as Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, he says, obviously, اطلبوا العلم أو الحكمة لو كان في الصين. You know, seek wisdom or seek knowledge, even if it takes you to China. So, of course, there's no harm in looking at studies run by Ivy League universities in the States, for example. And in one study by the Harvard Business School, it's very interesting. They're saying there's listening or hearing, and there's active listening. They're saying active listening is when you're attuning your thoughts and feelings to the person that you're talking to. So there's a bit of an energy being created. You're attuning to them. It's non-competitive by its nature, and it's two-way, and it's active. They discovered through studies that there are 3 ways or levels that we listen, and there are 4 styles of listening, generally speaking, that we get in and out of these styles. So one of the ways that we listen is cognitive listening. And that means paying attention to all the information, both explicit and implicit. Explicit means the obvious information, what the person's saying to you, but the implicit, like the tone of voice. You know, perhaps if there's a difference between a person saying, I know, and there is, oh, I know, that tone of voice, you understand. They're both saying, I know, that's the information, but the tone also gives you implicit meaning. And then comprehending that information. So that's, it's more cognitive, more to do with the senses. Then there's emotional listening. So when you're emotionally listening, what you're doing is you're staying calm, and you have a lot of compassion, and you're managing your emotional reactions. So in other words, when you're listening, you're not acting bored or annoyed. Now, the most heart-wrenching thing for a person who's speaking on the pulpit is when they see people that look really tired and bored. So if you are actually tired and bored, can you lie to me tonight and act like you're interested in what I'm saying? With the salat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. So I'm not having a go at anyone, by the way. I'm very tired myself. It's just more part of listening. One is cognitive, one is actually paying attention to the information, listening for tone and things like that, taking it all in. Emotional listening is actually when you're listening emotionally, as in you're staying calm and you're showing non-annoyance and you're not showing any boredom and you're showing nothing that might create negative feeling in the other person. Then there's behavioral listening, which is conveying interest and comprehension. So, yeah, I understand. Every so often you're tapping in, not just rehearsing it, actually listening and actually nodding because you understand what they're saying. This is the other level of it, because sometimes we want to actively listen, so we act like we're listening. Oh, yeah. And then they give you the instructions, and then you go back to your desk and you're afraid to go back to your boss and ask them, even though you acted like you were so in it, right? It's actually listening. Now, active listening is a lifelong journey, and it takes a long time to perfect it. But largely, and I won't go too long, inshallah, there are 4 styles of listening. So the first 3, what we said they are the levels of listening. So it's cognitive, as in we take in the information with our senses, we take in the emotion, we don't react to it, and also behavioral, so showing that you're listening at the same time. That's how we listen to people. But there are styles of listening. And these styles of listening are very interesting, because what happens is we actually misplace listening. Now, we know how to misplace words, you know. you have a tone of voice that you don't notice, it upsets a person. You're too direct with them, or you're not sweet enough and it hurts their feelings. But there are ways of listening that is also incorrect. It's like, oh, isn't there only one form of listening? You're hearing what I'm saying, and no. Apparently humans have 4 types of listening, at least. Now the 4 styles. One is task-oriented. Task-oriented listening is efficient, it's about information. Give me what I need to know, see you later. That's usually, it's more professional, like at work, if it's data, Being professional means it's kind of emotionless. You're just listening for the information and you're leaving. That's all you need. You just need the info. And I would say largely, maybe in our circles, it's probably more modest, right? So when we are being task-oriented, we have a project in our community talking to, say, the opposite sex. Generally speaking, people might put on a veneer of being task-oriented just so they don't extend too much, right? The next type of listening is called analytical listening. Analytical listening is basically analyzing from a neutral standpoint. So you're listening to someone and you're being completely neutral. You're not taking any sides. Generally speaking, if there's a dispute between two people, one person has to analyze between the two. They analytically listen to what's being said, and they don't take any sort of view or position. So in other words, they're not showing any agreeance. They're just saying, I understand, okay, I understand, that's what you've said, yeah, but they're not saying I agree, or nodding and saying that's correct, because 2 people are probably fighting at the moment. So that's usually where it's used in inside dispute resolution. There is relational listening. Now this is the sweet one. This is the stuff that we wish our relationships all had. Relational listening seeks to build a connection and responds to the emotions that are coming from that person, and the emotions of the underlying message of what the person's saying. Usually that's like, we'll say ghazal in Arabic, someone's being romantic, to married people in a halal relationship are being romantic to each other. That's relational sort of listening. They're tapping into the emotions of that person. The critical listener, which is number 4, typically judges both the content and the speaker themselves. Now, where do you see that? Usually on TV, usually on debates, inside the political scene, where not just what you're saying matters, but who's saying it matters too. They will sledge the person if the person is not of a high moral caliber, for example. If that person is not a person who's respected, then they usually don't take what they're saying either. You see, this is different to a relational listener. When we're watching the news, we're not trying to build an emotional sort of connection by that type of listening. We're just trying to get the information. So ask yourself a few questions. I think next time you go to listen to a person, someone is speaking to you, ask yourself, why am I listening? Make it purposeful for you. Why am I listening? Okay, I'm listening to, as the Imam says, actively listening, seeking to listen. I want to benefit, so I want to take something home. Okay, what's the one thing I can take? Who is the focus in this conversation? When someone comes to you with a problem, you have to say, oh, hold on. Usually, I critically listen to a person when they're talking to me. I might be judging them, and I might be judging the content of what they're saying. But that person actually came for advice. That person was in a bad spot. So what you've done is put a very bad taste in their mouth. What you should have done is say, hey, I want to relationally listen to this person. I want to connect it with their emotion and see what they're saying and actually what's under what they're saying. I'm trying to dig. Sometimes people, I don't know if you knew this, if you had, say, Arab parents, I can tell you this now, their anger, there's a lot behind the anger of an Arab parent, It's like concern, love, compassion, but some cultures are more passionate, and I'm sure it's not an Arabic thing, But if you're a parent and you've raised your voice at your kids, at some point your kids understand when they're older and they have kids that your anger wasn't actually malicious, it was deep concern for you. You see? So, but if you listen to that upset of your parent, for example, relationally, you would have understood right away. You wouldn't have been, for example, being too critical of them. You wouldn't have said to them, well, there's no use you being angry. Why are you being angry? I'm just going to ignore what you're saying. Instead of judging the content or the person, you could have really understood. So the idea of putting your listening in the right place is extremely important. And I say this to myself, how often I have listened to people analytically, or I've listened to them critically when I should have been listening to them relationally. And I think if you take away one thing, is take that away. When someone is talking to you, what are they doing? Why are they talking to you? Why are they saying? Try to just think about it. Pause. They won't notice that you're doing this. You'll be listening and you sort of be nodding, and you come to the answer pretty quick. This person needs to connect. If they need to connect, okay, I'm going to listen with the energy of, I want to feel what they're saying. I want to relate to them somehow so that they feel that connection. And also, it's a quick way to make friends, you know. People will like you a lot if you just learn how to listen. It's a saying by Dale Carnegie. There's a book here. I highly recommend it. It's called How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's a very, very good book. Very old book. Very old book. Probably, I think, maybe 80 years old or older. But see, Dale Carnegie was an interesting person because he studied the lives of the most influential people on earth, people that were successful, all of them in history. I believe including Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in his dhikr sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And he said how often I'd be invited to some event and a person would just talk and talk and talk and talk, and I'd listen and actively listen, and I'd take some insights, and I'd nod, smile and nod, and then the person would leave and say, what a great conversation I just had. It's a very quick way to make friends and also avoid any conflicts. A lot of the time when people are upset with you, or maybe they're upset with something else, but it's taken out on you. Our biggest mistake, and I'm going to say this personally, my biggest mistake is listening the wrong way. I looked at it critically. I looked at it analytically when I should have looked at it relationally. So inshallah, that's a takeaway. And as Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam says, "Man ahsana al-istima' ta'ajjal al-intifa'." You will speedily come to a benefit if you seek to hear what the person is saying. And of course, I think that's my time. So we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to make us of the people who He says, الَّذِينَ يَسْتَمِعُونَ الْقَوْلَ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ أَحْسَنَهُ. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to give us حسن العاقبة inshallah by our active listening. We ask Allah, اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج والعافية والنصر واجعلنا من خيار أنصاره وأعوانه والمستشهدين بين يديه ببركة الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.